There is a quiet kind of exhaustion that comes from being treated poorly by someone you trusted. It is not the loud, dramatic kind of fatigue. It is the heavy, lingering weight of constantly wondering what you did wrong. It is the mental loop of replaying conversations, searching for the moment you lost control of the relationship, trying to understand why someone who claimed to care could act so dismissive, so cruel, or so indifferent. You have carried that confusion for a long time. You have apologized for things that were not your fault. You have adjusted your behavior, softened your voice, held back your needs, all in an effort to keep the peace. And still, it never felt steady. You are tired because you have been carrying the emotional weight of two people. You have been trying to fix a dynamic that was never meant to be balanced. The truth is simple, and it needs to be stated clearly. You were not the problem. The situation you were in was built on imbalance. It was designed to keep you questioning yourself, while the other person avoided accountability. What you experienced was not a normal relationship struggle. It was a pattern of control, carefully maintained through subtle pressure, shifting expectations, and emotional inconsistency. When you understand how that pattern works, the confusion begins to lift. You stop looking for your own mistakes and start seeing the mechanism clearly. The core of this dynamic revolves around a psychological need for control and emotional supply. People who operate from this place do not connect in a reciprocal way. They connect to manage how they are perceived and to regulate their own internal discomfort. Your empathy, your patience, your willingness to make things work became the fuel for that system. Every time you reached out to fix things, every time you gave them another chance to explain, you were feeding a cycle that rewarded inconsistency. This is not about labeling or judging. It is about recognizing how human behavior functions when it is driven by fear of exposure and a need to stay in charge. When you see it for what it is, you stop taking it personally. You begin to understand that the cruelty was not a reflection of your worth. It was a tool used to keep you off balance. Let us look at the first pattern you likely experienced. It is the slow shift from warmth to coldness, the gradual replacement of affection with criticism or indifference. At first, the connection feels intense. You are seen, you are validated, you feel chosen. Then, without warning, the tone changes. A comment becomes dismissive, a promise goes unkept. When you ask about it, you are told you are overreacting, too sensitive, or remembering things wrong. This behavior happens because maintaining control requires keeping you uncertain. Certainty gives you power. Uncertainty keeps you trying. By shifting the ground beneath you, the other person ensures that your focus stays on figuring them out instead of trusting your own instincts. The effect on you is predictable. You start monitoring your own words. You hesitate before speaking. You analyze every interaction for hidden meaning. You lose the natural ease that healthy relationships provide. Over time, your nervous system stays in a low-level state of alert. You are not just dealing with their behavior, you are dealing with the constant mental effort of trying to predict it. That exhaustion is real, and it is the direct result of a system designed to keep you emotionally dependent. You are not failing at communication. You are navigating a moving target. The second pattern involves the push and pull of attention. There are moments of intense engagement, followed by periods of withdrawal or silence. When you are drawn in, everything feels urgent and important. When you are pushed away, you are left to fill the silence with your own anxiety. This cycle is not accidental. It is a behavioral rhythm that conditions your brain to chase connection. Intermittent reinforcement is a well-documented psychological principle. When rewards are unpredictable, the brain works harder to obtain them. In relationships, this translates to overanalyzing text messages, rereading old conversations, and convincing yourself that the next interaction will finally bring stability. The behavior happens because inconsistency keeps you engaged. If the dynamic were consistently negative, you would leave. If it were consistently positive, you would gain clarity and independence. The mixture keeps you anchored. The effect on you is a slow erosion of self-trust. You begin to believe that your worth depends on their attention. You start measuring your value by how quickly they respond, how warmly they speak, whether they choose to include you. Your internal compass gets recalibrated to their moods. You stop asking what you need and start asking what will keep them close. This is not weakness. It is a normal human response to unpredictable emotional environments. Your brain was simply trying to solve a puzzle that was never meant to be solved. The third pattern is the gradual narrowing of your identity. Over time, you stop sharing certain thoughts. You avoid certain topics. You learn which parts of yourself are met with indifference or criticism, and you quietly set those parts aside. You adapt to keep the connection stable. You become smaller, quieter, more careful. This happens because control is most effective when it feels like a choice. When you believe you are adjusting to be a better partner, you do not see the underlying pressure. You mistake compliance for cooperation. The effect is a quiet loss of self. You wake up one day and realize you have been managing someone else's emotional comfort at the expense of your own authenticity. You have traded your voice for peace. You have traded your boundaries for approval. The emotional cost is heavy, but it is often invisible at first. You feel hollow, not because you lack strength, but because you have been pouring your energy into a space that does not return it. You are not broken. You are depleted. Depletion is a natural response to giving without receiving. It is a signal, not a flaw. The truth you need to hold on to is straightforward. You were never the reason for the cruelty. You were the target of a pattern. Your sensitivity, your loyalty, your desire to understand were used against you not because they are weaknesses, but because they are human strengths. Manipulation does not require a flawed person to work. It requires a person who believes in fairness, who expects reciprocity, who trusts that effort will be met with care. You operated from that place. That is why it hurt. That is why it lasted longer than it should have. The manipulation succeeded because it was built on your good intentions. When you see that clearly, the guilt begins to dissolve. You stop asking what you could have done differently. You start recognizing what was never yours to fix. The shift is subtle, but powerful. You move from self-blame to observation. You stop trying to decode their behavior and start acknowledging what it actually shows you. You are not losing your mind. You are waking up from a carefully maintained illusion. Awareness grows slowly, then all at once. It starts with a quiet realization that the pattern will not change. You notice that apologies come without changed behavior. You notice that promises are made in moments of tension, but forgotten in moments of calm. You notice that your peace is always conditional on their comfort. When you see this consistently, your emotional stance begins to shift. You stop investing energy in outcomes you cannot control. You step back, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You recognize that stepping back is not punishment, it is preservation. You begin to separate their choices from your worth. You understand that their behavior is a reflection of their internal framework, not a measure of your value. This is where the dynamic changes. Not because you force them to see it, but because you stop participating in the confusion. You stop trying to prove yourself to someone who benefits from your doubt. You stop explaining your boundaries to someone who only respects them when enforced. You stop waiting for a version of them that does not exist. The mental space you reclaim is immediate. The anxiety that once filled your days begins to shrink. You breathe easier because you are no longer carrying the weight of managing their reactions. You are simply managing your own peace. Empowerment in this context does not look like confrontation or dramatic exits. It looks like calm consistency. It looks like choosing yourself without needing to announce it. Boundaries are not threats. They are quiet decisions about what you will and will not tolerate. You set them by your actions, not your arguments. You respond instead of react. You take your time before answering. You remove yourself from conversations that circle without resolution. You stop justifying your needs to someone who treats them as negotiable. Calm detachment is not indifference. It is emotional clarity. It means you can observe the situation without being pulled into it. You recognize the triggers, but you no longer feed them. You understand that their need for control cannot be satisfied by your compliance. You also understand that their discomfort with your independence is not your responsibility to fix. Self-respect grows in this space. It is not loud. It is steady. It shows up in the small choices. You choose rest over anxiety. You choose honesty over performance. You choose your own company over the exhaustion of trying to be understood by someone who refuses to meet you halfway. This is where the real shift happens. You are no longer trying to win their approval. You are reclaiming your baseline. Healing does not require them to acknowledge what happened. It requires you to stop waiting for that acknowledgement. Closure comes from within, not from outside. You process the experience by naming it accurately. You call the manipulation what it is. You call the exhaustion what it is. You stop romanticizing the good moments to excuse the harmful ones. You allow yourself to grieve the version of the relationship you hoped for, while accepting the reality of what it actually was. This is not about bitterness. It is about accuracy. When you see things clearly, you stop arguing with reality. You accept that some people cannot offer what you need, and that acceptance is not defeat. It is alignment. You move forward by rebuilding your relationship with yourself. You restore your trust in your own judgment. You practice making decisions based on your well-being, not on fear of their reaction. You learn to recognize the difference between tension and intuition. You learn that peace does not mean the absence of conflict. It means the presence of self-respect. You stop measuring your progress by their behavior. You measure it by your own steadiness. The idea of making someone regret their actions is often misunderstood. Regret is not something you can force. It is a private emotional response that comes when a person finally confronts the consequences of their own choices. In this dynamic, the closest thing to regret is the quiet realization that they have lost access to someone who genuinely cared. When you heal, when you become emotionally independent, when you stop reacting to their triggers, you naturally remove yourself from their system. You become unavailable for the cycle. That absence is what creates contrast. They are left with the reality of their own patterns, without the comfort of your empathy to soften it. But this is not your goal. Your goal is not to teach them a lesson. Your goal is to live in alignment with your own truth. When you prioritize your peace, when you protect your energy, when you refuse to participate in dynamics that diminish you, you naturally create a life that no longer fits their needs. That is not revenge. That is restoration. You are not trying to make them feel pain. You are choosing to feel whole. You have already survived the hardest part. You have endured the confusion, the self-doubt, the emotional whiplash. You are still here, looking for clarity, seeking a way forward. That alone shows your strength. You do not need to prove your worth to anyone who refuses to see it. You do not need to explain your boundaries to someone who only respects them when they are enforced. You do not need to wait for an apology that will never change the past. You only need to keep choosing yourself. Step by step, day by day, you rebuild what was fractured. You restore your trust in your own mind. You learn to recognize healthy patterns because you have experienced the alternative. You develop a quiet confidence that does not depend on external validation. You realize that peace is not something you negotiate. It is something you claim. The journey does not erase the past, but it changes your relationship to it. You stop carrying it as a burden. You begin to view it as a lesson. You understand that your sensitivity is not a liability. It is a compass. You understand that your desire for connection is not a weakness. It is a human need. And you understand that you deserve to meet that need in a space that honors it. Moving forward means accepting that some chapters close without neat endings. It means trusting that your growth does not require their participation. It means building a life where your energy is directed toward what sustains you, not what drains you. You will notice the difference in your own breathing. You will notice the difference in your own thoughts. The mental noise will quiet. The constant scanning for danger will fade. You will replace it with presence, with intention, with a steady commitment to your own well-being. You will not need to announce your healing. You will simply live it. And in that living, you will find the exact opposite of regret. You will find freedom. You will find clarity. You will find the quiet strength that comes from knowing you finally chose yourself. That is enough. That has always been enough. You are allowed to step into it. You are allowed to stay there. The path forward is not about looking back. It is about walking steadily into the life you have earned. And you have earned it. Every step you take now is a return to yourself. Keep going.